I'm here with Pastor. We are doing a Q&A session. Some of the questions you guys submit, some of the questions Pastor comes up with, I'll come up with, and then we just sit in here and we talk about them to help clarify these issues in your minds, to help strengthen us as we walk our Christian walk. So I'd like to thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your day. I thoroughly appreciate that.
I am enjoying this immensely. I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's if a so-called revival doesn't have preaching in it,
Yeah, sure. Today's question is more of has a personal angle for you.
Sure.
With everything going on in the world today, is there anything that has particularly caught your attention, and if so, why?
Well, I've been particularly intrigued, and we're making this video in February of 2023 for those who will see it later on. That's the context, chronological context. And in the last few weeks, we've begun to hear about, quote, a revival on some Christian college campuses. And actually I've been asked by various people to comment on that. What do I think about that? And so, in fact, you and I have talked about that quite a bit, and I've asked you to kind of look into it, and you've been very helpful to give me snippets, video snippets of what's going on in Asbury and various things. And I appreciate that very, very much. So I think I want to talk about that. I believe in revival, and I believe that there have been times, rare occasions though they may be, where God settled into human history to just take over, to bring people to Christ, to renew the church, to correct the church, to bring His people home. They've wandered away. And that's true revival. You can't. Revival comes from the Latin word to revive again, or to live again. Thus, vivification is the core of revivification or revival. Well, you got to be alive to be revived, right? So sometimes it's just God's people getting right. But it's also a time, especially in Great Awakenings, what has been commonly called Great Awakenings, where God brings in massive amounts of lost people into the kingdom. And those times really impacts the culture for good for generations. In fact, I think the first Great Awakening, which happened in the colonies in the 18th century, the mid-18th century, it's hard to know beginning and ending of a movement, but late 1730s to in the 1740s, maybe even up to 1750, where God just settled in on New England and brought a great awakening. I've read statistics which are stunning of how many thousands of people got saved.
Right.
And when you look at the population of New England at that time, it was a substantial percentage of the entire population.
Right.
Well, that just has a way of changing government. That has a way of changing ethics. It has a way of changing morality and schooling and everything in a society. So I thank God for that. And I do believe God works in that way. However, I need to say, I don't think everything that's purported to be revival is revival.
Right.
Okay? I don't think revival is primarily emotionalism. And I don't think it's primarily sensationalism. Revival isn't described primarily by how loud people are,
Sure.
or whether they fall on the floor, or whether they talk in tongues, or whether they cast out demons, or that's not the characterization of true revival.
Right.
I have used a fourfold description of what revival is. First, revival is doctrinally accurate.
Right.
Every great true work of God leads those in it back to the Bible. The Bible is prominent. And Bible preaching is prominent. And by the way, preaching is prominent in great revivals. It's if a so-called revival doesn't have preaching in it,
Yeah, sure.
and it leads people back to the doctrines of the faith. Second, it's gospel-centered.
Yep.
And that means, in my way of thinking, it focuses on Jesus saving lost people and cleaning up his dirty sheep. Okay? So there's forgiveness of sins. There's bringing people back to Christ and bringing people to Christ. And there's newness of life. So the gospel is very, very prominent. Third, it leads to and it spawns discipleship, which I interpret to be obedience to Christ and godliness. Okay? If you don't have obedience to Christ and godliness, you don't have discipleship. If you don't have discipleship, it's not a revival.
Right.
All right? And number 4, it centers on the exaltation of God. And it humbles people. So true revival isn't about what we're doing. It isn't about what we're experiencing. True revival is about God being God. And he's prominent, and he's praised, and he's glorified. And we're humbled by that. We're honored just to be his. And so we're humbled, and he's exalted. I think you will find always those 4 characteristics in every great movement of God. And I'll say a couple more things in closing. One is, time will tell.
Yep.
You don't make a judgment about something 2 or 3 days into it. Let some time pass, and it needs to be evaluated. It needs some wise discernment and leadership. So I think, for example, if a lot of young people are involved in it, that's a great thing. If young people are coming to know Christ,
sure.
But there will need to be some older elders, pastoral oversight to kind of guide it, so that it doesn't get beyond the boundaries of where it ought to be. So it's part of the church. The church is going to need to embrace that, and pastoral oversight is given, and then time will tell exactly. If it's of the Lord, it won't stop.
Right.
If it's not of the Lord, it's going to sputter out after a while. It was just and you've been in youth work, and I've seen young people where they went to a camp or they went on a retreat, and everybody got excited for Jesus. And by Wednesday of the next week, you can't find much excitement. It doesn't mean God doesn't work. And I'll say this also, and then I really will be quiet about it. Even in a time and a place where maybe the movement's not of God, God can still work in individual lives.
That's right.
And I have a testimony in my own life about how God got a hold of me as a teenager that I'll share probably with the church sometime. Whether it was a genuine work of God or not, God used that time to get a hold of me.
Yeah.
So God can work. I mean, he can work in and through sin, can he? Well, surely he can use these various movements, even though they may not be of the Lord, to work in the hearts and lives of people. So I always have hope that God is working in the lives of our young people.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Pastor.
You're welcome.